10 years, huh? It's kind of crazy to think that this proper YouTubing has been a part of my life for this long. I feel so freaking old. But what should I do to celebrate? It's not like there's some big video I've always promised to make, and I haven't really built up to anything, so what should I... Well, now I gotta. We're finally in the remake business, huh? For those who have been hanging around here for all this ungodly amount of time, first of all, thank you! But you may also remember that my very first countdown all those years ago was on my favorite 3D platformers. The main reason for this was because platformers were my favorite game genre back then, but my knowledge was mostly limited to 3D ones because those were the ones I grew up playing. Hence, we got that countdown, and as you might expect, it's not very good nowadays. You've got the usual offenders, the shitty mic quality, bad jokes, background noises, but I also had some very strange loopholes for a few entries that I'm still not sure what my thought process was. But this time, we're doing it right. Platformers are still my favorite game genre, and I want to do it justice this time. No exclusion for 2D platformers, no strange loopholes for games that have some platformer-esque elements. We're going as pure as possible in every dimension. For the past year and a half-ish, I've done my best to both replay some of my old favorites, as well as finally play some cult classics and famous retro platformers to make this list as up-to-date as possible. But I still missed a few, so there's a chance this is going to be outdated like next week. Anyways, are you ready for some peak platformers? Because I sure as hell am ready! I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far. To start off, I want you to imagine you're in a jungle. Forget about all the first world problems and just take in the nature around you. And when you feel free and detached from all the worldly bullshit, just go primal. Like an ape. Having fairly recently gone through all the Donkey Kong Country games, I can say with confidence that these apes sure know how to star in some solid platformers. But even after enjoying my time with the SNES trilogy and Returns, I think my favorite still has to be the game that originally set me down this road. And wouldn't you know it, it's a game originally released on the Wii U, baby! I wouldn't say Tropical Freeze is necessarily the culmination of everything DKC has done up to this point, because I could see some people still seeing it as a downgrade from the original trilogy. The other Kongs aside from DK and Funky are still not playable outside of co-op, the secrets aren't nearly as satisfying to find as DKC 3 for example, and the game feel might throw you off when compared to the SNES originals. But what Tropical Freeze does above all else is polish the entire formula to a ridiculous degree. DKC games have always been pretty good about not falling into the usual platformer world themes, even Returns where the names for each world were that, but Tropical Freeze mixes things up constantly. No level in the game feels too similar to one another, as each one has something to set itself apart in terms of presentation, level gimmicks, or the obstacles you face. Additionally, the game polishes the mechanics from Returns, making them a lot more fun as a result. The game also gives you a lot of freedom on how to tackle each level. You can use items both in and out of levels, opening up routes for self-imposed challenges and setting the difficulty to exactly where you feel comfortable. Tropical Freeze is just a really satisfying game to play, and while some of its aspects may have been done better in one or two of the previous games, it definitely deserves the seal of peak monkey media. Good job, Wii U. I'm proud of you. I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
god, this thing is heavy.
PS5 might have no games, but at least the console itself has something to keep me company. Look, I'm not going to say Astro's Playroom is some kind of system seller or an overlooked gem, but as I've said before, I think it's also a game that shouldn't be belittled due to its status as a demonstration of the PS5's and the DualSense controller's capabilities. Because in my opinion, what we have here is an extremely charming 3D platformer with enough merits to match even some of the greats. I think one of the best things about the game, along with, the fun gameplay and unobtrusive gimmicks, the great level design, and the bots just being the most adorable beings, is the thematic harmony of its different levels. Each of them is tied to a different aspect of the console, and it makes for some clever use of the console's different parts. The cooling system is an ice level, the SSD is full of fast flying vehicles, and the GPU has the most graphically complex area in the game. And while you could say there are some level themes that are a bit of a stretch, it always feels like you really are exploring a game console. And not that it needs mentioning since it's basically the main selling point, but the game's celebration of the PlayStation brand and its dozens of IPs from over the years makes this game even more special. And I think that's a great way of describing this game. It may not be the biggest or deepest platformer, but when it all comes together, it really is something truly special. And that's more than enough for me to call it a favorite.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
I'm sure for most people, Capcom's Blue Bomber is almost a shoo-in for a list about platformers. Unfortunately, I am not most people, because Mega Man and Mega Man X are two completely different things. Look here, totally different. Anyways, while the quality of this sub-series is a bit inconsistent to say the least, when it's fun, it's really fun, and X8 in particular makes me chant the word peak a whole lot. One of the most important things to me with the X games is their game feel. As a sub-series that prides itself on run-and-gun action and fluid platforming, the correlation between character feels good to play and the quality of the game is pretty directly proportional if you ask me. At least in most cases, and X8 is easily the best feeling X game for me. The fluidity of X's movement and shooting, Zero's fun close combat options, Axel's versatility and crowd control, each character is fun in their own way and it feels so fucking good. Now, some of the stages may be, for a lack of a better term, a little hit or miss, but I'd still say a good majority of them are really fun and have some neat concepts not seen in the series before, or just similar concepts better realized. The bosses are also pretty damn fun, and while they do fall victim to the age-old weapon weakness dilemma, I feel they're still fun enough for me to overlook that. But perhaps my favorite thing about X8 is its approach to the upgrades. You can now mix and match X's different armor parts, and most passive upgrades are available to you in an in-game shop, giving you a chance to upgrade each playable character equally. And while grinding for medals is frustrating, and getting a few of the rare medals to expand the shop is fucking dog shit, X8 is a game meant to be replayed. So even though it's on the shorter side, if X8 clicks with you, you could potentially have hours of fun new playthroughs ahead of you. It may not be without its bumps, but the, as of now, final ride of the Maverick Hunter still stays fun as hell, for at least 80 to 90% of it.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
While they've become more commonplace in recent years, it wasn't that long ago when the indie scene was almost completely dry of 3D platformers. Everywhere you looked, 2D games inspired by various classics were taking the indie world by storm left and right, but despite 3D platformers having just as much potential for inspiration, the games just never happened. That's why back in 2017, A Hat in Time felt like just the game the indie scene needed. Nowadays, there are a lot more options, and some of them have probably surpassed this game, but my love for it still holds true regardless. Taking control of a sassy, top-hatted child, Yo Watanabe, your peaceful journey home is interrupted by these bald assholes, and the shenanigans that ensue cause your precious timepieces to scatter all over the nearby planet. And as the rule of platformers states, it is time to collect, and collect some more. But unfortunately, some people catch on to the power sleeping inside the timepieces, which means your journey won't be without bumps. While exploring the planet, HatKid comes across various challenges. Time rifts that make me wish I had a backpack for some reason, a murder mystery on a train that is also a regular platforming level, an open collection of sky islands with birds, and some Mark Hamill furry or something, I don't know. The point here is that A Hat in Time is very varied when it comes to everything it offers, while still keeping its core gameplay mechanics at the design's, well, core. One final thing that makes this game an old-timer for me is its charm. I'm probably going to mention this a lot throughout the video, but even if the story isn't anything special, which it mostly isn't in platformers, the charm of the world and the characters can do wonders for the game's identity. And A Hat in Time has that in spades. Whether it's the bumbling but unapologetically malicious mafia goons, the big ghost with an even bigger presence, Snatcher, or the colorful crew of the Arctic Cruise, these NPCs bring so much life to the game's world and elevate the writing beyond just HatKid's funny facial expressions. And that's no small feat. Those are some funny-ass expressions.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
Well, time to become one of those people, I guess. Sonic as a franchise has kinda dropped for me in recent years, at least compared to the relative pedestal I used to hold it on. But while some of my favorites aren't as good as I once thought they were, I think I'd still call it a great franchise overall, even if it's not one of my all-time favorites anymore. And hey, I think most of us can agree on the high quality of certain Sonic games. This one has Knuckles. I'll give you 5 seconds to figure out which game I'm talking about. Like Sonic as a whole, I wouldn't really put the classic games on that high of a pedestal because I only really like half of them, but I can see why a lot of people do that. And in my opinion, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the peak of the classic era, polishing the mechanics and the gameplay to perfection and making the levels even more unique and fun than Sonic 2 already did. Sure, there are some misses within this level lineup as well, but overall, this selection is easily the best of the classic quadrilogy. I think 3 and Knuckles levels are also a perfect combination of the high-speed gameplay and the light degree of exploration that most 2D Sonics have, with the special stages that are sometimes a little too hidden, like Come On, and other useful goodies hidden off the beaten path. The game also offers a lot of replay value with dozens of different unlockables and new playable characters that will almost definitely have you approach each level differently than with Sonic. I don't think there's much more to say beyond that since the story is non-existent, but that's just because the game is about as purely solid of a 2D platformer as you can get. And now, because I can't think of a clever way to end off this segment, here's me doing a somersault.
I'm like Sonic. Ow.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
Aw shit. Here we go again. Another recent favorite of mine, which feels really weird to say since this game is 25 years old already, but yeah! Both Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie are excellent games despite their age, and I won't be hearing anyone telling me this series is not all bangers. Except maybe the vehicle one, but I didn't play that one. This could mean more than one game. Anyway, Banjo-Kazooie definitely deserves its status as a classic platformer. Not only is nearly every level in the game fun to explore, each locale is also really memorable, be it because of the NPCs, the fun tasks you need to do to get more jiggies, or simply for the aesthetic and vibe. The people at Rare are masters at striking a great balance between nice and varied challenges with equally memorable level design, and Banjo-Kazooie is the ultimate testament to that. The whole game is just super rewarding to play, and another thing that helps with that is your constantly expanding arsenal of abilities. While it does mean you need to do a fair bit of backtracking once you get new abilities, the game utilizes them in fun ways, and the abilities themselves also give a nice feeling of growth throughout the journey. And on top of that, the game just exudes charm. From the mumble voiceover to the often humorous style of writing and certain quirks some characters have, there's nothing quite like this little gem from 1998. Except its sequel, and the indie's spiritual successor. Bottom line, game good, jumping around fun, Jickeys give me dopamine, Banjo is just like me, and given the chance, Kazooie would absolutely call me some kind of slur. What a magical video game this is.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
I think it's really funny that we're following up a platformer about as traditional as it gets with a platformer that basically abandoned that formula after its predecessor. Look, I know people have a lot of different opinions on Jak 2, but at the end of the day, while it doesn't stand quite as close to the top of my favorite platformers, my overall love for this game still hasn't wavered. I'll be the first to admit that the levels in Jak 2 are not nearly as memorable or fun to go through as the precursor Legacy, but what gives Jak 2 the edge for me is how everything you're doing now connects to the overarching plot of the game. Thanks to the new mission-based structure, there's now a purpose behind everything, whether it's to help the underground resistance fight Haven City's tyrannical leader, stop the impending metalhead monster invasion, or racing in the Coliseum just for the hell of it. And the actual content of these missions is about as solid 3D platformer action as you can get. Granted, the game is more combat focused than the first game, and there are always some misses here and there, be it bad vehicle segments or lots of dying, but when the game keeps it clean, you've got fun and fair platforming challenges coupled with some tough but mostly fair enemy encounters and cool set pieces in a majority of the levels. Overall though, it's the character of Jak 2 that wins it over for me. While the world is dark and gritty, the characters living in it mostly aren't, and this colorful cast helps bring both variety as well as tension to the story. While it's very different, I feel Jak 2 never forgets where it comes from and still tries to have its more lighthearted nature and the platforming gameplay shine through above all else. And to me, a game like that is easy to love, even if it's a renegade.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
When I started doing research for this video, aka playing some platformers on my bucket list and replaying others to get an updated opinion on them, I noticed that very few of them were actually able to topple some of my favorites, which is why most of this list might seem pretty familiar ground. But thankfully, there were some exceptions, and one such exception really surprised me. Because while I already really liked Psychonauts, replaying it made me realize just how much I fucking love it. The concept of a platformer where the levels are different individuals' mindscapes should already give you an idea of how crazy some of these levels can get. The levels in Psychonauts reflect the subject's mental state, personality, and pretty much everything that makes them themselves. Whether it's the neat and tidy mind of the meticulous Sasha 9, the twisted streets of a conspiracy theorist, or the velvet-painted streets of an artist chained to his past, these levels do a great job of representing each subject, all the while offering really unique challenges for you to overcome. And the real world is just as fun to explore. You're free to roam around the Whispering Camp pretty early on using all your psychic abilities, and your curiosity is often rewarded with things else to upgrade your abilities with, or just your numbers going up, which is a very good incentive because my brain says big number means big good. Exploring outside the mindscapes is also encouraged to check out the goings-on of the NPCs, netting a bunch of different dialogue at different points of the story. Which brings me nicely to my favorite part of the game, the writing. The characters are all wacky, weird, and even raunchy, but in an endearing way that I think reflects the period this game was made in, that being the early/mid 2000s. Its charm is reminiscent of the animated shows of that time, with an over-the-top save-the-world plot that both kids and adults can enjoy. And yet, I feel even people who didn't grow up with that era can still easily enjoy Psychonauts. It's creative, weird as hell, and it has psychokinetic bears. I don't think you can ask much more from a piece of media at that point.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
Ha ha ha, Kirby is a merciless abomination. You know what? No. I am so sick of people slandering this literal ball of positivity. Just because he happens to have a bigger appetite than most people doesn't mean he wants to destroy the world or whatever. You should all be ashamed. Anyway, a good Kirby game on a list of good platformers must be one of those so-called free thinkers. And while it pains me to leave excellent games like Planet Robobot and Forgotten Land out, Return to Dreamland has always been peak Kirby for me. Once again, the big thing that sets this game apart for me is its game feel compared to the other entries. I know the dreaded sideways Wii Remote control scheme can be a killing blow for some people, but I've never really minded it, and the game's controls being as simple as they are, you don't really need anything extra, and controlling Kirby and the other co-op characters feels like a dream, restricted to D-pad or no. And that's already on top of some really cool level themes and designs. There are some Kirby staples of course, but stuff like Raisin Ruins, Naughty Noon, and Egg Engines do some fairly unique spins on the usual flair. This is also the game that started to put small puzzles and other mini challenges to find collectibles in the levels, which in this game are the energy spheres. And while I'd say most others that came after this do this aspect better, it's still fun even in this first outing. And then there's probably the most contested part of the game, the super abilities. And yeah, I will admit that most of these segments are just press 1 to win, but the visual spectacle with them never gets old for me, and sometimes you do have something a little more involved too, making for some cool puzzle-ish segments. Also, have you seen these new copy abilities and the old ones they improved to the maximum? Hello there, best ability in the whole franchise. Yeah, this game is a perfect 10 out of 10. All other arguments are now washed away.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
Alright, enough of these recently found loves and teenager favorites, it's time to get to the baby stuff. As much as I like to think of myself as an intellectual individual that judges every game by its own merits, it's no secret that a lot of my favorites happen to be games that I was introduced to when I was still a wee toddler. But thankfully, most of these childhood favorites have stood the test of time, and I don't need to blame nostalgia goggles entirely for liking them. One good example is a certain marsupial platformer of the PlayStation 1 variety, and she crashes on my Bandicoot till I'm warped. What makes Warped the best Crash game in my eyes is how it perfects the formula laid out by the first two games while adding a few new tricks and features of its own. After all, they already came up with a pretty winning formula in Crash 2, so there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Just give us new level themes with new obstacles and mechanics to mess around with, and make vehicle/special levels that aren't the jetpack levels from Crash 2, and we're golden. And would you look at that, that's exactly what Warp did, no way! And the new level theming in question, that being different eras in time, for the most part, is great as well, as it allows the levels to stretch out much beyond the scope of the first two games. There are some themes that are pretty similar to the previous games, but most of what Warped offers is completely new, with all the solid core mechanics and every so often vehicle levels you can muster. Crash 3 as an experience resonates with me to this day, because while I might get mad at the occasional time trial challenge or not enjoy a level or two, it's all wrapped in a tight neat and easily replayable package, complete with the series' trademark cartoony charm and characters. And while I can't say for sure whether or not it will ever be topped, even without my nostalgia glasses, I can tell you it's going to be one hell of a climb.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
Yo, check out this sweet zodiac calendar I found. As you can see right here, our current year of 2023 is the year of the rabbit. And oh, would you look at that? The next year happens to be Thanks to Insomniac Games, the Dragon Zodiac is the only Chinese zodiac with a whole video game based on it. And this is where I get comments telling me about the indie masterpiece known as Year of the Rooster or something. Anywho, while I definitely have more nostalgia for Crash, I've come to prefer his dragon kinda sorta not really companion. And well, there's only one Spyro game that's named after a zodiac, and I know this one for a fact. Spyro 3 doesn't do that much differently from its predecessors, but what it does is basically combine the best aspects of both Spyro 1 and 2 and polish them to a T. Gee, that sounds familiar. The level objectives flow together much better now, as there are always some dragon eggs to find just by exploring, but just as many require you to play through the main path of the level or complete some side objectives. And since there's only one main collectible now, you don't need to worry about a sudden requirement of some other collectible that had been optional until now to get to the final boss or something. I also really like the new playable characters. Most people give them shit for not being Spyro, but I've always liked how they break up the usual gameplay loop. Not all of these segments are great, of course, but the same can be said for some of Spyro's segments in literally any of these games. Also, the worst parts of this game happen when you're controlling Spyro and not the other characters, so, you know, checkmate haters. Year of the Dragon is a testament to Insomniac's talent in level design, and along with the, once again, series trademark cartoony charm and characters, it's easily the best Spyro game for me. And since it is factually the 5th best platformer ever made, maybe some kind of funny post-2-decade sequel would be in order? I'll sell you my kidneys.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
You know, we've had some pretty amazing games so far, but I'm kinda craving for a platformer with an above-average story. And maybe it'd have some cool combat too, like it's a part shooter and a major theme that'd work well in both gameplay and story, like, I don't know, time travel? If only a game like that would actually exist. Oh! In case you haven't noticed, I'm not actually ranking these games solely on how much I like them overall, but rather how much I enjoy them as platformers. So while Ratchet & Clank 3 is still my favorite R&C game, it focuses just a little too much on combat for me to hail it as one of the best platformers ever made. It's a good thing then that my second favorite is not only almost as good as Up Your Arsenal, but also the perfect mix of platforming and the fun trademark R&C combat. In short, A Crack in Time feels like the perfect evolution of the R&C formula. Every weapon is fully realized, fun to use, and creative as hell to boot, and the new gadgets introduced both give you more maneuverability in combat and also make traversal a lot more fun. Be it riding through landscapes with the hover boots, or with some neat new puzzles that include not getting mauled by killer bugs. And speaking of traversal, that's pretty much perfect here as well. The total number of planets might be smaller, but each one is more expansive than ever before and feels like its own ecosystem. And even with the smaller number of planets, with the vastness of space at your fingertips to explore, the game becomes much bigger, and there's an absolute fuck ton of fun optional challenges on offer almost everywhere you go. And the story, oh my God! An engaging narrative that explores both Ratchet's and Clank's pasts as well as their relationship to each other. I mean, it's no Shakespeare, I guess, but the character moments are so strong. Dr. Nefarious's return is gloriously entertaining, and the emotional beats hit home every time. It baffles me that Insomniac was able to create a package this solid at a time when platformers were kinda declining. But lo and behold, It's here, and nobody's taking it away from us.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
Oh hey look, I'm not even gonna bother with the "look at how obvious this is" shtick this time. I think I've made it pretty clear that the Sly Cooper games mean quite a lot to me throughout the years, and if I haven't, I clearly need to be louder. But yeah, I like these games a lot, and since they are platformers, their appearance pretty near the top could have been the free space on your bingo card. And yeah, obvious on top of obvious, but my favorite is still Honor Among Thieves. We've got another third game in the trilogy, and surprise, surprise, its greatest strengths lie in perfecting and polishing what came before, rather than completely reinventing everything. And Sly 3 does just that. The three main characters are more fun to play as than ever before, new quality of life improvements have been added to make the game smoother, and the overworlds are now a lot more compact and fit to be explored by every character. And like Spyro 3, Sly 3 adds its own new playable characters, bringing more fun playstyles to the missions. Speaking of which, while Sly 3's jobs don't necessarily build up into a big heist, at least as much as Sly 2, what it makes up for it is with the cool new scenarios for each chapter and overall variety in mission types. And though some uncultured swine might call it unfocused, to me none of it overstays its welcome and just puts a fun and unique spin on things alongside the usual Sly fare. We can argue about the story all we want, but I think most of us can agree that the character writing is pretty fantastic, developing the older characters in some satisfying ways and making the new ones super likable. Though at the end of the day, my own bias says this game is just the best at everything and everyone else should just agree with me. However, while this is my personal favorite game out of all the entries on this list, I think the next two shine as platformers just a little bit more.
I'm gonna reach for the stars, although they look pretty far.
So, if you haven't played this next game, you might be experiencing a serious lack of childlike wonder and joy. While there's no shortage of choices for phenomenal Mario games to take a spot on a list of platformers, to me, there was never a choice. Because for me at least, I don't think there's ever been a platformer, let alone a Mario game, that continues to capture me in the same way as Super Mario Galaxy. To this day, Galaxy is probably the most varied Mario game when it comes to its level themes. And sure, you've got a lot of the usual stuff too, but not only does Galaxy play with some of those level tropes, there's always just as many cool and unusual themes present as well. Yet despite its variety, every level in the game feels fully realized and not just gimmicky stuff for the sake of it. Except when they actually are that. All the levels also stay true to the core mechanics, those being traveling across the various planets in the galaxy and the use of gravity on the smaller planets. So no matter if the galaxy looks normal and you can't see the vast emptiness of the universe that makes you question your significance everywhere, it always feels like you are indeed on a journey in space. And these mechanics also create their own unique challenges and secrets that couldn't really be replicated in any other Mario game, unless your name is Super Mario Galaxy 2. I could go on and on about this game, about its glorious presentation and how it amps up the atmosphere and even the narrative at points, the amount of charm each character has, and even interesting backstory in Rosalina's case, or the simple but amazing game feel, but there's only so much I can say. Super Mario Galaxy is a special kind of game, the magic of which is very difficult to capture, and even with some minor faults tarnishing it, it's purely and simply a masterpiece. But before we get to number 1, let's recap. I have no idea what that was, but anyway, unlike 10 years ago, I actually have some runner-ups waiting in the wings this time, so here are some other really great platformers. Azure Striker Gunvolt 2, a superb high-speed 2D platformer that's a step up from the original in almost every way. Better levels, better bosses, better story, overall an incredibly solid experience. Rayman 2, The Great Escape, a great classic for certain. Rayman 2 doesn't necessarily do anything groundbreaking, but its level design is very solid and the darker tone gives the series' world more identity than the first game ever did. Ape Escape 3. Monkeying around has never felt this good. Easily the most polished and fun entry of the Ape Escape trilogy with fun theming and levels. SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. The funny sponge comes in with the honorary number 16 on the list. Battle for Bikini Bottom not only retains all of the trademark SpongeBob charm, but also creates a really fun adventure in the series context. Shovel Knight. Speaking for the main campaign at least, it's a tough as nails but super fun love letter to the 8-bit era of games. Charming too, have you met our Lord and Savior, the Trouble King? Spark the Electric Jester 3. A really fun Sonic Adventure clone with great flow to its levels, some fun occasional gimmicks, and even fairly satisfying combat thrown into the mix as well. The story definitely goes places, but I also think it's a great step up over a typical platformer story. Rocket Robot on the Wheels. It seems virtually impossible for Sucker Punch to miss. A game that really makes you feel like a robot on wheels doing a lot of fun platforming. There are occasional moments of N64 jank, but overall it's aged like a charm. Klonoa 2, Lunatius Vale. Extremely charming 2D platformer with equally fun gameplay and level design to match. Also a surprisingly emotional story. Klonoa truly is my boy. And then a bunch of games from series already represented on this list, such as Sly 2 Band of Thieves, Psychonauts 2, Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Sonic Generations, Mega Man X4, Ratchet & Clank 3 Up Your Arsenal, Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie's Double Trouble, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back, Jak 3, and Banjo-Tooie. You know, I'd like to think that over these 10 years I've matured and gotten a better grip on what I like in games. A lot of things have stayed the same, but the new order and entries reflect my opinions way better nowadays. But the one thing I refuse to let go, no matter how much I reordered the list or went over my thoughts on each game, was the #1 spot. So now, 10 years later, let me play you once again the tunes of my childhood. Oh god fucking damn it! Look, this is not the complete credibility suicide you might think it is. I'll fully admit that there are several better games on this list, even some that I genuinely do like more than this game. But me and Donald Duck Quack Attack share a very special bond. Why else would I have made a 40+ video on it and all its different versions that you should totally watch, by the way, hint hint? At its core, this game is a very simple hallway 3D platformer. You go to a world with 4 levels, unlock a bonus level by collecting cursed children's toys, maybe do some time trials, beat the big bad boss of the world, rinse and repeat until Daisy is saved. And even though the journey to get there is a lot of fun, that was never the reason why this game stuck with me. To me, it is the quintessential Donald Duck video game, and platforming in its purest, most fun form. I've talked about the charm of this game before ad nauseum, but in a word, while the game is a cakewalk in terms of challenge, the little details in the presentation and design tickle my brain in all the right ways. As for it being platforming in its purest form, the best way I can put it is, whenever I pop in this game, I feel like I'm home again. Not that any of the other games on this list can't also do that, but with Quack Attack, that comforting feeling is present all throughout. It always reminds me how much joy even the simplest platformer can bring me. It might not be the best game or even the best platformer on this list, but to me, it's the perfect representation of why I love this genre, and for that, it would feel wrong to call it anything else than my favorite platformer. I'm FinnishDuck, and here's to another 10 years of content creation, and hopefully those 10 years won't include this thing.
I wanna be a hero. Pokemon!
Thanks for watching, everyone. It's a shame I couldn't get this video ready for the exact anniversary of the original video, but I think it doesn't take away from its significance too much. I definitely want to remake some of my other old videos in some fashion later down the line, but who knows when that might be. For now, I want to focus on a possible new direction for the channel, which might not actually be that new since stuff like countdowns and reviews aren't going anywhere, but I'll keep you up to speed. But nevertheless, I hope you'll enjoy whatever I end up cooking.